27th day, Upper Wind Month, 1 CE. Another misty morning came and Nemel set off to conduct a more thorough investigation of Warden's Vale. Fenrose, Elise and Ida came with her, as did 4 woodcutters and 3 goblins. The 3 goblins had failed the basic ranger assessment and were assigned as general laborers in the camp. They loaded their vessel with goods procured over the past 2 days before sailing across the Katza River. Wooden stakes tied with bright crimson ribbons marked off the area around where Nemel had left the Solita with its wagon, so she figured it was all right to start using their transport. After transferring their cargo, she asked the Solita to take them south. South? Elise asked. Why not north to Warden's Vale? There's a new settlement in the south where they're clearing land for development, Nemel answered. I figure they're closer to our stage of things, so they'll have more of what we need to see. Their wagon sped along, rolling smoothly over the nearly seamless paving stones of the road. 100 meters to either side, the land had been cleared of trees and brush. The wooden palisade of a settlement came into view about 30 minutes later. An elder lich stopped them at the gate. Submit yourselves for inspection. The undead mage didn't wait for their response. 2 death knights came forward and checked through their things while the elder lich recorded their findings. It raised a hand over the pile of goods. Appraisal magic item. Detect enchant. It repeated the process with each passenger, stopping for an extra long time to take note of Nemel's equipment. A minute later, it waved them through. You are free to proceed. Thank you for your cooperation. Nemel still wasn't sure how to feel about the arbitrary way in which the undead performed their duties. On one hand, they gave off a feeling that they were simply doing their jobs. On the other, one could only wonder what would happen if something interfered with their work or if they discovered something that they didn't like. Their wagon made its way down a wide avenue with workshops lining either side. Nemel had the Solita pull over in front of a building with a butcher sign. Several men and women passing by sent curious looks at her 3 goblins, but they didn't linger to watch. Let's sell our meat first, Nemel said. I don't want to flood our wagon. She went inside to see the shopkeeper while everyone else helped unload the wagon. Behind the front counter, a little blonde-haired girl with an apron over her kirtle was sitting on a tall stool, kicking her dangling legs. Nemel stared at her for a second before coming forward. Welcome. The little girl smiled a cute little smile. Hi, Nemel replied. Ah, are you the master? The little girl gave her a funny look before hopping off of her seat. She adjusted the scarf over her hair as she walked over to a door behind the counter. Pa. Someone's here to see you. Nemel sighed. Of course the little girl wasn't the master of the shop. She had just come to expect everything to be ridiculous in Lady Zaradnik's territory. A man a bit shorter than Nemel appeared from the back of the shop. He wiped his hands on a towel as he came over. Mornin' miss, he said. What can I do for you? Good morning, Nemel replied. I'm Nemel Gran. I just moved in a few days ago, about 20 kilometers downriver. Pleased to meet you, Miss Gran. Name's Bochia. The door to the shop opened. Fenrose held open the entrance while their goods were carried in. Mr. Bochia leaned over to look past Nemel as crates packed with snow were lined up along the floor. Seems like you're new here, the butcher said. Come in from me rental? Our winter, Nemel said. Not the goblins. HRN. Guess that explains the funny way you talk. Mr. Bochia gestured to the crates of meat being brought in. Looks like you're clear in Wildland. That right? Yes, that's right, Nemel replied. The hunters round here dress their kills, Mr. Bochia said, but they don't pack 'em in ice like that. But they'll spoil if we don't. The butcher knelt behind his counter, producing something that looked like a curtain. He laid it out between them. This thing here's a lifesaver, well, a meat saver. I think the official name is Shroud of Sleep or something close to that. Nemel frowned at the item's name. May I inspect it? She asked. Sure, but it's nothing fancy. She held a hand out towards the length of fabric. All appraisal magic item. Detect enchant. It really is a shroud of sleep. The item was one that would instantly arouse suspicion in the Empire. Shrouds of sleep preserved corpses so that they would remain fresh for as long as they were covered by the item. There were 3 major uses for them. Preserving the corpse of an important individual for resurrection at a later time was probably the highest profile use. Keeping corpses from decaying for delayed funeral services was another. Finally, necromancers used the item to save corpses for experimentation or vile acts of reanimation. A random person found to possess a shroud of sleep would immediately be taken in for interrogation by imperial authorities. Nemel stole glances at the links of sausage hanging behind the counter. People in Lady Zaradnik's territory were allowed to eat other people, so were they using shrouds of sleep as a makeshift preservation device? Were her goblins nothing more than sausage to the humans here? How are they used? Nemel asked. It's pretty simple, Mr. Bochia answered. You kill something and wrap it in the shroud. The ones made here even have a hanger attached for convenient storage. Every household has at least one of them. Anyone who works with meat has a few. The butcher gestured for Nemel to come into the back of his shop. Along one wall, a long row of shrouds of sleep hung on a pole. He lifted one, revealing a dressed deer within. Wait a minute, Nemel frowned. How is it working on these? Is it actually a variation on a regular shroud of sleep? I don't know about variations or anything, but a corpse is a corpse, right? Actually, no, there's a trick to it. What trick might that be? Well, Mr. Bochia said, this magic item preserves corpses. As long as what you stick in it is a corpse, it'll work. Anything that's processed into something else, bacon, sausage, jerky, mince, cuts of meat, whatever might be considered a new product doesn't count as a corpse anymore. The item only preserves one corpse, tooth, so when you take cuts out of your deer or whatever's in there, you can't throw the leftovers back in. Yup, these people are ridiculous. The Empire's eventual goal was to have a high degree of magical integration as a whole, but even this level of common knowledge was beyond the grasp of the average citizen. Everyday butchers did not casually explain how magic items worked and re-envision their theoretical effects to suit their purposes. Are there any other magical devices or techniques that I should know about as a newcomer? Nemel asked. You're better off seeing Miss Pam about that, Mr. Bochia told her. Her alchemy shop doubles as an outlet for magic items. It's a good time to be in the meat market, though. Demand from Mirantal and the Great Forest of Top keeps prices nice and high compared to everything else. She settled her business with the butcher and they returned to the wagon with their empty crates. Once everyone boarded, the wagon trundled forward. It didn't get far, however, as they spotted the alchemist's sign 100 meters away. Inside, a young woman about Nemel's age looked up from where she was pouring something into a beaker. Welcome. Oh, a new faces? Good morning, I'm Nemel Gran. I moved to a place downriver a few days ago with some of my people. In that case, the woman said, welcome to the upper reaches. My name is Pam. I'm a student at the Faculty of Alchemy in Warden's Vale, but I've been running this shop for the last little while. Crates full of herbs and various other plants were brought in by the woodcutters and the goblins. They were placed on the long counter that stretched across the front part of the store. You brought goblins with you, too? Pam asked. No, they're some of the neighbors that joined us yesterday, Nemel answered. Lady Zaradnik wants the demi-humans around here to start mingling with us, but they've been pretty shy so far. Not a single one has come by here. What's your secret? It's simple, just beat them up. As if I could say that. I asked them to join and they eventually joined, Nemel said. Weirdly enough, they seem to fit right in once they figure out what's going on. Interesting. Pam leaned forward and eyed the goblins. What do these ones do? We haven't figured that out yet. The tribe that joined us had 2 rangers and 2 mystics, so these guys must have done things around their camp. They're just helping out with odds and ends for now. They had to do something. Living in the wilderness wasn't so easy that one could just consume resources for nothing. Even children had to work. Since they had some equipment, one or more of her general laborers probably had production skills in leatherworking or woodworking. Nemel wandered around the shopfront while Pam looked through the goods they had brought in. As Mr. Bochia had mentioned, there were magic items alongside the various potions, tinctures and other alchemical products on display. She stopped at a rack that held several shrouds of sleep, eyeing the price on the sign above them. Expensive. No, each one should pay itself off eventually. The problem was that they needed a lot of them. She could ask Dame Verilyn for capital, but Nemel also felt like it was something that her settlement could gradually achieve on its own. That being said, while pride and a sense of ownership were important, it wasn't something they could bide their time with. According to her rangers, outpacing the growth of wild animals with such a small community would be a hard battle. They needed to bring in 20 large animals per day to be able to even start chipping away at the population. Let's see, if our starting goal is 20 per day, we'll need another set of shrouds of sleep while the first is used to transport goods, plus we could use some to preserve our meat supplies. I need 50 shrouds of sleep, Nemel said. But we can't afford to buy that many right now. Would it be possible to come up with some sort of arrangement? Pam looked up from the crates of herbs. Sure. Sure? Nemel blinked in surprise. This shop doesn't have 50 lying around, Pam said, but I can order them in. It'll take a while to make them all, but you'll get them eventually. But what about the payment? I can lease them to you. Aren't you worried that something might happen? Fendros asked. Something? Pam tilted her head. No, not really. Fendros exchanged glances with Elise and Idaho. They were probably thinking about risks like theft. It was unthinkable to so casually hand out magic items in the Empire, but no person in their right mind would try stealing something if it meant Death Knights and Elder Liches chasing after them. If contracts for leases and gradual payments for goods could be reliably enforced, then a lot of things would go more smoothly. As Nemel was a member of a family that produced magic items, a number of attractive prospects immediately came to mind. Being able to lease magical tools and appliances provided not only convenience, but practical improvements to the citizens' quality of life. Magical lighting, for instance, could extend the hours that an artisan could work beyond what daylight afforded. Since they didn't burn fuel or require maintenance unless damaged, leasing out the magic item for a modest rate would eventually result in pure profit. The extra productivity facilitated by the magical lighting could then be put towards permanent ownership, used as capital for other equipment, or treated as discretionary income. This process presumably applied to anything so long as profit was being made off of whatever the item was being used for. Let's do that then, Nemel said. Oh, that was quick, Pam replied. People usually take a while to decide. My family's in the magic item business, so I can see how it works. That so? Our faculty is looking for master artisans. Do you think they'd be interested in coming here? They have a lot of things to take care of at home, Nemel replied. Thank you for asking, though. I see. Well, I'll talk to Miss Linez about arranging those shrouds of sleep for you. A few other magic items are being manufactured by the workshops in Warden's Vale. We've got magical lighting, magical space heating and magical cooling. Interested in any of those? I think I've seen the magical lighting and heating that you're talking about. What's the cooling one? It's basically the same temperature control appliance, but set at a different temperature. We ultimately want to develop an adjustable version, but, with summer coming up, our priority has been setting up cold storage for herbs, vegetables and processed foods. Nemel tried to recall the volume of air that Dame Verulin's heating strips could affect. They were sleeping in tents for the moment and permanent structures wouldn't come up until autumn. Out of curiosity, Nemel asked, are the buildings in Warden's Vale designed with these magic items in mind? It's the other way around, Pam answered. Lady Zaradnik started raising those nice big houses and workshops around Warden's Vale first, then she chartered her magic item and alchemy companies. Since she made the buildings so uniform, the faculty was able to use that as a standard for its temperature control items. One item covers enough space for a single floor of a regular home in Warden's Vale. The scheme now is that the first and second floors get heating items and the basement gets a cooling item, so it becomes a superroot cellar. Do larger buildings work like that, too? Our early ones don't fit exactly, Pam said, but everything built nowadays does. It's all nice and convenient when it comes to household comforts. I'd advise that you follow the same building standards so nothing goes to waste. The materials that Nonna had dumped on her had a section for building standards, but she hadn't paid it much mind. She didn't think that it mattered when all she had was tents and shacks. What other magic items do you have for sale? Nothing else, Pam replied. Our hands are full just making these. We're nearly caught up with demand in Baroness Zaradnik's territories, but the entire duchy wants our stuff. We've got orders to last us until the end of forever. Does that mean my order will arrive at the end of forever? Lady Zaradnik ensures that local demand is addressed first, Pam said. All of our work's been focused on getting items to every household over the last year. Exports are only starting to trickle out now, Wait a minute. How many arcane artisans are in Warden's Vale? The time that it took to produce a magical utility item followed some simple rules, simple for those familiar with the matter, at least. Barring the time it took to gather reagents and craft the physical object being enchanted, one multiplied the tier of the spell being employed by the power set to the spell for that item. In common vernacular, the power levels were referred to as minor, lesser, regular, major and greater. If the item had a persistent effect that could be activated and deactivated, the total was multiplied by 2. Dame Verulin's heating items, which were used to maintain a pleasant temperature for Zushiru's stand, were iron strips imbued with a lesser temperature change effect. Temperature change was a second-tier spell. The lesser effect threw in a multiplier of 3. As it could be activated and deactivated, that number was multiplied by 2 for a total of 12 days to create. That meant that it took a single second-tier caster over a month to create the 3 items required to regulate the temperature of a single regular house in Warden's Vale. The Shrouds of Sleep on display used the second-tier Gentle Repose spell as a minor effect, which meant each Shroud of Sleep took 4 days to create. Magical lighting was simpler, as the Continual Light spell was developed to instantly create permanent lighting on a target object. As long as one had the requisite amount of ruby powder, one could enchant a lamppost and leave it shining forever. "Are you all right?" the alchemist asked. Nemel shook away her wandering thoughts. "Sorry, I was trying to figure out how many arcane artisans Warden's Vale has. Even if the population is small, you fill demand for the entire territory rather quickly." I guess that would be pretty confusing if you're not used to this place. There are around 75 human artisans around the territory right now." 75? It may have seemed a pittance with hundreds of elder liches all over the place, but it was a number of arcane artisans otherwise only seen in a good-sized city. "Where in the world did you find so many?" Nemel asked. "Most of them were here before Miss Lanez and us apprentices arrived," Pam answered. "More come in every once in a while. They're all necromancers, so everyone jokes that Lady Zaradnik picked up an evil cult that was just lying around somewhere. Makes sense, though. Sorry, my head stopped working when you said that." "The Sorcerer King is the most powerful necromancer in known history," the alchemist told her. "He's the god of death, as far as we're concerned. Necromancy is suppressed in the region, so it makes sense that all the necromancers hiding around the area come swarming to the Sorcerer's Kingdom, right? Besides, with so many ordinary citizens using undead labor, every third person in the territory looks like some kind of necromancer." "I suppose that makes sense," Nemel hesitantly voiced her agreement. "Do those necromancers that you mentioned cause you any problems?" "Aside from occasionally pestering the undead, not really. They're basically wizards who've gone from clandestine studies to open studies. That means they mostly act like the rest of us in our respective fields of expertise. Lady Zaradnik's trying to turn this place into a center for magic, so all of the magic casters here are working toward that common goal. We're here to build something up, not tear things down." Nemel pondered the approach that was being taken toward magic in Warden's Vale. The Empire valued arcane casters highly and it was easy to find work so long as one wasn't marked by the Imperial administration somehow. Even then, one could strike off on their own and become an adventurer or worker. The thing was that the Empire treated magic as its own thing. Much of it couldn't be helped. Just as those of other vocations tended to relate well to their peers in the field, arcane casters were in a little sphere of their own. Not only were their fields of study so far removed from the mundane matters of the vast majority of imperial citizens, but it was costly to train a mage and very few became professionals. Further exacerbating the problem was the way that the Empire's greatest magic casters tended to purposely segregate themselves from the masses. While it involved itself in national efforts, the Imperial Ministry of Magic was essentially an institution where members just shut themselves away to pursue their studies in seclusion or amongst an exclusive group of colleagues. Warden's Vale, on the other hand, was taking an entirely different approach. The Baroness was trying to populate her domain with so many magic casters that every third person was one. Things once considered esoteric and unapproachable to the uninitiated would become common knowledge gained from everyday experiences. The people had a practical gateway in the form of alchemy, which was the arcane vocation most integrated with society at large. Nearly every industry used alchemical products in their processes or at least could. education afforded to everyone made for the second angle of attack, and many families might see their sons and daughters become mages. Divine magic was the only avenue that appeared to be missing, though Corlin Harbor's Temple University meant that it was only a matter of time before the temples had the staff to send to Warden's Vale. There were the lizard man druids as well. Nemel doubted that they were left unconsidered with how involved Baroness Aradnik's plans were. All done here, Pam slid a piece of paper between them. Please make sure everything is accounted for, Miss Gran. Nemel raised the receipt to scan its content. As expected, she murmured, herbs and such are cheap here. Yes and no, Pam said. The reagents that you gathered are all things that foragers commonly look out for, which is probably what they've been trained to do back where they came from. Let your people know to keep an eye out for other things. Eventually, you'll start seeing stuff that's worth more. Who's been collecting these? Some rangers who moved in with me. Ah, that's good, then. Rangers and druids won't over-forage like other people might. Just let them do their thing. If there's something that Lady Aradnik absolutely won't budge on, it's preserving the natural balance of her territory. Overburdening the land will get her on your ass real quick. Has that happened to anyone? Not really. Just some minor things here and there. We don't have desperate people trying to scrape up a living here, and there hasn't been a real greedy guy that ignores the rules yet. Not that I've heard of, at any rate. The last part was a bit unsettling. It either meant that people were satisfied with what they had, or the greedy guys vanished without a trace or memory. Oh, by the way, Pam said. I didn't ask about consumables. Nemel scanned the vials, jars and miscellaneous containers lining the shelves behind the counter. She had packed some healing potions and other curatives since they knew that they wouldn't have access to a temple, but now they had what was probably a goblin druid. There were other things even more frequently employed, however. Is there anything the camp needs from this shop? She asked the row of settlers standing along the wall. Glue, varnish, lime, lye. The men rattled off 24 materials used in woodworking, construction and daily life. Pam had a couple of skeletons bring out barrels of the requested goods from the workshop's warehouse. The cost of everything wiped out the proceeds from the foraged goods that they had brought in and put a solid dent into Nemel's remaining funds. Do you have a merchant guild account? Pam asked as Nemel counted out her payment. I don't. I always just used my family's before. You should get one set up as quickly as possible, the alchemist said. People don't usually use physical coinage when performing large transactions. I know it sounds strange for a frontier territory, but we're pretty well connected with the rest of the country. I didn't see a merchant guild branch in Warden's Vale, Nemel said. Corlin Harbor's the closest one. It'd be a day trip with those new barges. The next time she had planned on going there was when she would need to meet the next batch of settlers. As Pam mentioned, however, it wouldn't take more than a day to go back and forth. She would have to think of some other things to look around for to make the most out of the trip. After finishing up her business and loading her wagon with the supplies, they continued shopping along the main street of the settlement. She found that the shops were not just local workshops servicing the community, but outlets for industries in Warden's Vale. The local blacksmiths, for instance, filled custom orders for the nearby construction, but the tools and supplies being sold were delivered from the foundry in Warden's Vale. This gave a sense of uniformity as everything was constructed out of the same, standardized components. Eventually, they came to Nemel's main objective for visiting the settlement, which was the mill and the nearby workshops processing lumber. Though the river was nearby, the mill didn't use a water wheel. Instead, a soleator was used to power the machinery. A horse shaft was connected to a giant steel gear, which in turn powered a drive shaft extending to the workshop. There, 2 death warriors were feeding logs through a circular steel saw under the direction of a woodcutter. Nemel's people watched as the log was quickly divided into uniform planks. The planks were loaded into one of the ubiquitous metal containers that were seemingly used for all cargo. There's something I can help you with? A man called out to them as he walked out of a nearby office. We're new to the territory, Nemel smiled in greeting. I just brought some of my woodcutters to see how things are done here. I see. Well, this part don't work too different from a decent watermill. The difference here's that the undead handle the logs like twigs, so moving wood around goes faster. How we handle transport is a godsend, too. Can the undead do this part on their own? The machinery is preset so they can, the man said. All they have to do is repeat a few simple steps. The woodcutter on duty calibrates the machinery according to our queue of orders. A mill usually employed dozens of people, hundreds, if one included all of the associated industries and services. The mill here looked like it has 8 humans between the various operations at most. The sound of metal doors banging shut filled the air when the Death Knights closed the filled cargo container. As if on cue, a soul eater drawing a wagon came into the yard. A gurney crane offloaded the empty container from the wagon, and then loaded the filled container. Once it was secured, the soul eater trotted off with its shipment. "Those go to the lumber yards in Wardensvale for seasoning," the man said. "How many trees do you go through per day?" one of Nemel's woodcutters asked. "This here's the quick part," the man replied. "We go through trees faster than they can bring 'em in. Right now, they're clearing the way to the Western Pass. You can go take a look at how they do things if you want. A freight wagon brings in a fresh set of trees every half an hour or so." They thanked the man and left the lumber mill before heading over to take a look at the workshops nearby. This part, at least, seemed normal enough. The shops were almost entirely operated by humans fashioning parts and pieces for local construction. When a soul eater pulling a wagon full of logs entered the southwestern gate of the settlement, they rushed over to their wagon to follow it back out. It led them upriver, passing another wagon bringing timber in the other direction. 25 kilometers from the settlement, they stopped at the end of the pavement where piles of timber awaited loading. Her people backed away nervously as an elder lich came forward to question them with 2 Death Knights. "You are not staff assigned to this site. State your name and purpose." Nemel Gran. "I work for Dame Verilyn. These are some of the people from my settlement. We've come to see how land is cleared around here." The elder lich raised a hand to the side of its skull. After several moments, it set it back down again. "You may proceed. Do not block the passage of cargo. Straying beyond the bounds of the worksite will place you in the territories of the local tribes. Enter at your own risk." "Do they just say ominous things on purpose? Wait, doesn't that mean I invaded the neighboring territory yesterday?" She had crossed the river, spied on the neighbors, and her raid netted her a small tribe's worth of goblins. Nemel the demi-human subjugator. The road to potatoes was fraught with all sorts of questionable acts. At least she wasn't enslaving them, or was she? She intended to pay them eventually, but they were currently working for nothing but room and board. They walked west up the slope, occasionally passing a soul eater dragging a tree chain to its harness in the other direction. A few hundred meters further along, they came across a group of vampire brides in yellow helmets and blue coveralls with reflective stripes directing an assortment of undead laborers. "Good morning," Nemel said. One of the vampire brides turned to reply to her greeting. "Good morning. What are you doing here?" "Earthworks for the highway," the vampire bride said. "Well, the new highway, at least." Beyond the vampire brides, the undead were tearing up what looked like the remains of a much older road that had been exposed from their excavation. "Wait, aren't those ancient ruins?" Nemel said. "Should you really be destroying them?" "Parts of this old highway were identified half a year ago and we've avoided construction here because of that," the vampire bride replied. "Lady Zaradnik wanted to commission the Adventurer Guild to investigate, but they're still working in the Azalizia Mountains. The Prime Minister sent down the order for the new highway to be laid without further delay." Nemel eyed a wheelbarrow of ancient paving stones being carted away. Any fragment of history from before the demon gods was precious and rare, but most people only saw it as an opportunity to lay claim to wealth long lost by its original owners. The Sorceress Kingdom seemed to care even less. Then again, the Sorcerer King's claim to Eranthal was supposedly ancient, so maybe they already knew the history of the region. "What are you doing with all the stuff you're tearing up?" Nemel asked. "Baroness Zaradnik instructed us to store everything in Wardensvale," the vampire bride answered. "Representatives from the Adventurer Guild will investigate everything when they're available." "I see." At least someone was making sure that it wasn't being thoughtlessly discarded. They continued walking past the construction site, eventually reaching the end of the clearing. A dozen men and women were directing teams of skeletons to clear the brush while others examined the huge trees left over in their path. One of the woodcutters took a piece of chalk and drew several lines on a trunk over a meter in diameter. "We should walk around the side, Mistress Nemel," one of her woodcutters said. "Looks like the trees are set to fall toward the clearing." After they scurried out of the way, The woodcutter gave a nearby death warrior a thumbs up. The death warrior hefted a one-handed battleaxe and started chopping out the marked area. 2 minutes later, it moved to the other side. In less than 4 minutes, the 60-meter-tall conifer fell into the clearing. 4 Death Knights came up and started excavating the stump while a team of skeletons trimmed the branches from the fallen tree. "What do you think?" Nemel asked. "It's fast?" one of her woodcutters answered with a helpless laugh. "A tree that big would take one of us a day to get down with an axe. Then it'd take days to trim and split up so we can move it with draft animals." After the woodcutters and their skeleton laborers trimmed off the last of the branches, the tree trunk was divided into 10-meter-long sections. Iron stakes were driven into the sides of the closest one and chains were attached to them. They hitched the felled timber to a saw leader that arrived to drag it off. "How much is one big tree like that worth?" Ida asked. "Lot," the woodcutter answered. "Could probably sell it for somewhere close to 100 platinum in our winter. Assuming you can even find one that big and manage to move it. One tree like that could build a small village. Or a heck of a lot of furniture. Do we have trees like that at our place?" "Plenty. Bigger, even. Problem's how much work would go into harvesting and transporting even one of them. We can drop trees near the river into the water and move them that way, but, after that, we'll need animals, except I haven't seen a single ox or draft horse the entire time here." Another huge tree crashed to the ground. Going by the man's estimate, a week of work was going by in minutes right before their eyes. Smaller trees were felled by a single stroke of the Death Knight's greatswords. It was no small wonder that Baroness Saradnik's subjects shrugged off the 90% tax rate like it was nothing. The question was whether it was incentive enough for her people to set aside their fear of working with the undead. Nemel licked her lips nervously. "If you'd like," she said, "I can lease these types of undead to help with your work." Her men exchanged looks. "If that's what you think is best, Mistress Nemel." No, I wanted you guys to be okay with it." "Doesn't look like the people here have any problems with them," one of the woodcutters shrugged. "Besides, we won't be able to get far without using the undead like everyone else here." Relief flooded through her, and she concealed a sigh. "Then let's head back home and drop our things off," Nemel smiled. "I'll fill out the paperwork when I visit Warden's Vale this afternoon." Ilishnish crawled on her hands and knees, upside down on the ceiling of her lair. She fished out a platinum coin and fixed it to the ice. It was the 500th coin attached to the ceiling, so she decided that it was an excellent time to take a break. She silently dropped down to the floor. Her hand went into one of her infinite haversacks, producing a magical light. A smile grew on her lips after she activated the item and held it aloft. Not bad. The platinum coins caught the illumination and sparkled like a field of glittering stars. Once she placed a few thousand more coins up there, it would truly begin to look magnificent. Most of her morning had been taken up moving her treasure from Warden's Vale to her lair. A meter-high pile of platinum coins and diamonds awaited installation, and much more would eventually make its way over from the Empire. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, satisfaction filling her being over the lair's growing sense of wealth. At the same time, the underlying sense of nervousness over her new assignment marred the otherwise wonderful feeling. She wouldn't be able to linger much longer. Ilishnish returned to her natural appearance, padding out of the frozen island's tunnels and slipping into the lake. She broke out of the ice on the other side, rising into the air on leisurely wing beats. As she circled the mountain, she took inventory of her domain below. The snow cloaking the lower slopes was rapidly receding, giving way to spring. Her minions' camp had grown slightly, adding another storehouse and summer shelters for the freshly acquired goblin minions. Several people appeared to be missing, including Nemel. Ilishnish's gaze went across the river. Her wagon is missing, so she must have wandered off somewhere. Ilishnish's patrol brought her to the northern border of her territory. She spotted a pair of Kronos rangers and watched them for a time. Most of their observable behaviors had become familiar to her since moving in, and she was confident that she could pass herself off as one of them. At least if she didn't have to speak their language. Their general attitudes were markedly rangerish, which was mostly in line with the Frost Dragon's outlook. In hindsight, it was convenient to have the mutualistic races living nearby to observe. Or maybe the presence of the Felid Beastmen was what convinced Lady Shiltir that it was possible to send her to the Beastman country. The sight of a barge coming up the river prompted Ilishnish to fly down to Warden's Vale. She landed in front of the harbour master's office and poked her head in. Jeeves looked up from his paperwork. "Good afternoon, Dame Verilyn." "Good afternoon, Jeeves. What's in that barge coming upriver?" Jeeves reached out and pulled a binder out from the row in front of him. His bony fingers flicked through the pages. "Nothing out of the ordinary, I'm afraid," the skeleton merchant said. "We have shrouds of sleep coming back from the last meat delivery, iron ore, reagents for alchemy and enchanting. If you're looking for your shipments from the Empire, they only come in once a week and everything stored in Wagner County was delivered all at once." "I see," she said with a disappointed frown. "Thank you for letting me know, Jeeves." "It is always a pleasure, Dame Verilyn." Elishnish had already moved everything in her excitement, so it seemed that there was little else to do. She took off from the harbour, flying over to the village and landing behind Baroness Ziradnik's manor. In the village square, she found Nemel, Fendros, Elise, and Ida, plus Fi and Gog, the two goblin mystics. The villagers offered curious looks at the two goblins, but otherwise minded their own business. "Dame Verilyn," Nemel curtsied as Elishnish approached. "Good afternoon." "Good afternoon," Elishnish bobbed her head. "What brings you to the harbour?" "Just taking another look around," her minion answered. "When we arrived, we only looked at what each place was, but we didn't really look at what they were doing. It's all quite astonishing once you add everything up." "Will that make my taxes add up at an astonishing rate?" Nemel turned her head, glancing at their surroundings. She was clearly wary about something, but Dame Verilyn couldn't detect any threats. "Dame Verilyn," she said, "I understand that you're very self-assured, but it's usually not good form to discuss finances in public like this. Maybe you'd like to join us on our trip to the Lizardman village. We can talk about things on the way there." "Why are you going to the Lizardman village?" "I'm not very familiar with druidic magic, so I'm headed there to consult with their druids. Dame Gronvid said that they have a sort of school for druids and I'd like to see if our goblins can learn from them. Also, I put in a request for a camp merchant with Nonna on the off chance that she might know of one and we ended up getting a Lizardman merchant." They went over to the lakeside harbour and boarded the small barge moored there. The elder lich captain gave Elishnish what she thought was a dirty look. She assumed her snow elf appearance before taking a seat on the cabin rooftop beside Nemel. "So," Elishnish said, "what was it that you wanted to discuss?" "I'm adjusting the development schedule," Nemel replied. "Well, it's more like I'm redoing it. We're not done examining everything yet, but it's clear that my initial plans were far too humble." "That's a good thing, I think. It means I get more taxes sooner, right?" "About that," Nemel said hesitantly, "I'm advising that you waive taxes for the next few years, Dame Verilyn." Nemel's figure blurred as Elishnish's eyes welled with tears. She sobbed and the floodgates broke loose. "You promised me taxes," Elishnish wailed. "I put my hopes and dreams in you." "Why, you'll get your taxes eventually." The liar leaned toward Elishnish with a placating gesture. "I just wanted to take our domain's production and reinvest it to accelerate development. You'll get more taxes in the long run than you would have if you had just hoarded your revenues." "I don't believe you." "But it's good economic sense." Elishnish turned her head away with a sniff. She shook away the hand on her arm. Why had she been foolish enough to trust a human? They were like tiny green dragons without scales. "Dame Verilyn," the human said, "I don't understand. Why is it so terrible that you'd react like this? I didn't even know dragons could cry." "We can't." "Are you saying that those are fake tears?" "No," Elishnish said, "I'm saying that dragons can't cry. But other races can cry. To be frank, I'd be beside myself with the strangeness of it if I hadn't cried over Heginmill's single gold coin back then. With alternate selves came many strange things. A dragon's superior psyche could overcome most of them, but some weren't so easy to control." "Now I'm confused," the human said. "Would you be just as upset if you were a dragon?" "Yes. I just wouldn't cry over it." "Can you at least tell me why you're so upset? I felt that what I recommended would please you." Elishnish heaved a sigh. "You promised me something," she said. "Then it turned out to be a lie." "But it's not a lie. I'm just amending what I said. It's an improvement on the original promise." "Not to me, it isn't. You were supposed to oversee the development of a part of my land and produce taxes. Instead of taxes, I got an amendment. That makes it a lie." Even if that's the case, it got replaced with something better, right?
How would I know? Elishnish said.
I'm a frost dragon. I already went out on a limb with this abstract arrangement hoping for a desirable outcome. Instead, I got some other abstract thing. She simmered internally over how she had gotten so excited over nothing. Since the Viridian Dragon Lord had successfully collected wealth from humans, Elishnish thought that she could do it too. Except she didn't have the mental faculties to deal with all of the convoluted humanisms as green dragons could. It was proving to be a sorrow-filled lesson about going beyond the bounds of one's nature. Then how does Lady Zaradnik do anything with you? I'm sure she's had to change things here and there as you learn about one another.
I don't have any problems with Lady Zaradnik, Elishnish replied.
If Lady Zaradnik says that she'll do something, she does it. If she promises to give me something, she gives it. She hasn't lied to me a single time.
The liar fell silent.
Elishnish could sense that the human was filled with disbelief at her statement. That's the problem with humans, they're just so transient and unreliable, swirling around like a snowflake in a blizzard.
What should I do with these minions now?
They traveled in silence while the vessel completed its journey. Chief Issess and several attendants awaited them at the village berth.
Welcome, the Lizard Man Lord greeted them cheerfully. It's good too. What happened? Elishnish sighed again.
She scrubbed her cheeks and fixed her appearance.
Dame Verilyn got upset over something I proposed, the human said. I have no idea why she's being like this. Chief Issess looked between them, scratching the black scales of his head. That's a pretty vague explanation, he said. What did you propose?
I asked if she could waive our taxes so we could focus our resources on domain development.
Then she cried. I didn't know dragons could cry. They can't, Elishnish said.
I thought so, Chief Issess said.
Anyway, what did she cry about?
Something about promises and abstract stuff and being a liar.
What did you promise?
Our arrangement was that I come and work for Dame Verilyn, managing her territory in her name.
The Lizard Man Lord lowered his hand and crossed his arms.
Let me guess,
you promised that she would get taxes once you got started. That's right, the promise breaker said. Then you're the one in the wrong here.
How?
The human blurted out.
Because you said you'd do something,
Chief Issess said, and now you're not. But the new proposal is better. Chief Issess shook his head slowly.
I assume that Dame Verilyn told you how frost dragons learn and remember things.
Yes, that's right. They learn best through direct experiences. They also remember every experience.
So you know that and you're still doing this to her?
I have no idea what I'm doing.
Humans. Chief Issess muttered under his breath.
All right, look.
Did your territory under management earn anything since you arrived?
A bit.
Then you owe Dame Verilyn taxes, right? Have you paid those taxes?
No. It's only been 2 days since we got here. They're usually collected seasonally. But that doesn't help you with the big problem you've got brewing right now, Chief Issess told the human.
Do you want it solved or not?
I do, the human replied.
I really don't follow you, though.
That doesn't matter,
just pay her before something happens to you.
The human pulled a ledger out of the satchel slung over her shoulder. After opening it and studying the content for a moment, she unfastened a pouch from her belt and fished out an assortment of coins. She held them out to Elishnish. These are your taxes as of noon today, Dame Verilyn.
Elishnish received the coins, which amounted to 2 gold, 3 silver and 7 copper.
If she made that much in 2 days, her annual taxes would amount to 51 platinum and 8 gold. Now make your proposal again, Chief Issess said.
Nemel frowned at the Lizard Man Lord before turning to address Elishnish again.
Dame Verilyn, she said, I recommend that you reinvest your taxes to speed up the development of your territory. If you think that's prudent, Elishnish replied. You are supposed to manage my territory, after all. She deposited the coins back into Nemel's hand. Her minion looked thoroughly confused. Wait, what? I still don't get what happened. Chief Issess exchanged a look with Elishnish. The Lizard Man Lord let out a rueful chuckle. The problem was that you were told everything you needed to know about what would happen. Then you chose to ignore it. You're not the first human that I've seen that assumes other races are just funny-looking humans that think and act just like them. In this case, you were doing something terribly dangerous. You may still be doing something dangerous depending on how things turn out. Nemel still looked clueless. Chief Issas rubbed the back of his neck with a clawed hand.
Okay, so you and Dame Verilyn had an agreement.
A promise. You promised to serve her and produce taxes. She agreed to let you manage her land.
To her, it's I agreed to have this human do this thing and she's been waiting for the result.
The experience.
Before,
the experience was a human promise to do this,
but they didn't and offered some other unknown thing instead. Now,
the experience is a human promise to do this, and they did it. You get it?
Not really, Nemel frowned. Dame Verilyn is pretty smart, why can't she just see where everything is going?
Because she can't, Chief Issas said.
She can't do it any more than you can fly by flapping your arms. That's how frost dragons work. They don't know what something is for certain until they experience it. When you throw around terms and concepts that are foreign to her, it's just a big nothing in her head. The best she can do is compare it to what she's seen or put a lot of effort into collecting information on. Frost dragons have perfect memories, but the way that they interpret the world and act on it is contingent on those chains of experiences that they remember forever.
That's why what you're doing is dangerous.
Dangerous in what way? You're instilling expectations into her. If you lie, then you are a proven liar and everything you say and do will be viewed with distrust because Dame Verilyn will remember that one time you lied forever. On top of that, she made a promise to you and you can be sure that she'll try to keep that promise. The problem is that you aren't keeping yours and she'll need to do something about that, something that will free her from her promise to you. I don't know what that means in the Sorceress Kingdom, but if she wasn't one of His Majesty's subjects, she'd probably just kill you. You're still not out of danger, though. You've shown that you can do as promised, and now she's expecting you to deliver on your new promise. If your reinvestment doesn't work out as intended, you're going to be going through this all over again. Nemel stared at the coins in her hand and swallowed. So when I say something like development,
she asked, what do you have in mind, Dame Verilyn?
I said so from the beginning, didn't I?
Elishnish answered. But your idea of a farming village
didn't match mine.
Chief Issas let out a low laugh. You had better check to see what those farming villages look like before you make any more proposals.
After traveling around the duchy, I can tell you that the ones here are nothing like the ones inland.
I'll be sure to visit them, Nemel said.
By the way, how did you know what to do with Dame Verilyn? Baroness Saradnik gave the both of us lessons on governance and such. We went through weeks and weeks of classes, so I got to see firsthand how she learned things. Classes? Wait a minute, Nemel furrowed her brow at Elishnish. Doesn't that mean you already know about all this? Just because I've spent some time learning things with Lady Zaradnik doesn't mean that I know all there is to know, Elishnish told her. I remember everything that went on during those classes, though. Someday, I'll be able to make more sense out of it, but that won't turn me into some sort of dragon lord. You should be some sort of dragon lord already, shouldn't you? Chief Issas noted. I don't know why people keep saying that, Elishnish frowned. It isn't as if I do anything especially powerful. The other ways are to be an ancient dragon or to be an exotic magic caster, and I am neither of those. Not being able to cast magic at all was becoming increasingly frustrating. Elishnish watched her 4 human minions cast spells every day in the Empire and she still hadn't grasped even the slightest inkling of what they were doing. Even asking them to explain didn't get her any closer to harnessing her innate draconic magic. Now, Chief Issas said, I believe you're here for a couple of things.
Yes, that's right, Nemel nodded.
Fi and Gog here joined my settlement with their tribe recently and I'd like to see if they can learn from the druids here. I don't think the Sorceress Kingdom has any official druidic circles and your group here seems to be the closest to one. That's true. The only organized group of druids larger than ours is the one serving the Lizardman Alliance village in northern Tob. Most tribes in the Sorceress Kingdom are independent of one another and their mystics are equally so. I'm not sure at what point a group of druids becomes a druidic circle, but it's probably something we'll have to look into at some point. What was the other thing? Nemel produced a scrap of paper from one of her pouches. I'm here to pick up Astsa. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce this. I put up a request for a mercantile agent for my settlement and none appointed me in this direction. Astsa, Chief Issas said. He's one of the merchants working here. This way. Chief Issas led them deeper into the circular village complex. They walked through the outer ring, crossing the bridge to the inner village where several market stands were open for business. The humans stuck with Nemel, but the two goblin mystics went to curiously look at the wares on display. "Did we see him the other day in Wagner County?" Nemel asked.
"No.
Most lizardmen don't like straying too far from home.
It's even worse if you're far from water. Traveling around the duchy is rough." The lizardman lord raised a foot and wiggled his webbed toes. "Dry land does a number on the feet, so preparations must be made to endure the journey. Well, not so much the journey since we get around quickly here, but standing around at each stop and working. The bunch that moved into Erantal complain about the baked city streets all the time." "If that's the case,
"Will Istzaztza be alright working for our territory?"
"He's the one that agreed to it," Chief Isses said.
"You'll find out whether it's alright or not when he starts working." Compared to humans, who tended to overcomplicate everything and were vulnerable to optimism and pessimism, lizardmen were more practical and direct. That behavior tended to make the lizardmen feel shrewd and defensive, as they only committed as much as they cared to risk and were quick to assess a situation, minimize losses, and create contingencies. They didn't stop at any of the stands, instead going past them to one of the storage rooms. A skinny lizardman with ochre scales stood between four of its brown-scaled fellows, examining the goods on one of the shelves. "Istzaztza," Chief Isses called out to him. "Your new wife's here to pick you up." A strangled noise came out of Nemel.
"Wife?"
She took a step back.
"That's right," the lizardman lord said.
"Since he's marrying into your village, you offered yourself, right? Or maybe it's one of these other females?" Fendros, Elise and Ida retreated behind Nemel.
I didn't know that he would be marrying into our village," Nemel said.
"Is that some custom or law or—" "Hey, now," Chief Isses drew himself up to his full height. "Don't tell me that you expected to run off with one of my people just like that. How do we know he'll be taken care of if you can't commit to at least this much?" Nemel's eyes threatened to roll out of her head as her mouth worked soundlessly. Her eyes went back and forth between the three lizardmen, who had come forward at the rising commotion. The boss minion swallowed. "Which one is Istzaztza?" Nemel asked. "Who are the others?"
"Istzaztza is the one in the middle," Chief Isses said. "The other four are his assistants. They'll be your secondary husbands. Make sure you take care of their needs." "Congratulations," Elishnish smiled.
Weak sounds issued from Nemel, who had bunched up her hands below her chin.
Rather than being pleased over the arrangement, she was thoroughly distressed.
"Chief," a female voice called from the doorway,
"About what's happening here?"
Oh, Ezri's." Chief Isses glanced at the newcomer nervously. "We were just introducing Istzaztza to the humans here."
"Ah, the merchant thing," the lizardman ranger nodded. "But why does this human look so out of sorts?
Is she sick?"
"She just got married," Elishnish said.
"Married?" Chief Isses made a frantic gesture. "It's nothing. What did you come to see me about?"
"It doesn't look like nothing,"
Ezri eyed her lord suspiciously.
"Who did she get married to?"
"These 5 lizardmen," Elishnish told her. Chief Isses implied that it was some sort of custom or law.
The lizardman lord retreated.
Ezri's clawed foot caught him in the hip, knocking him to the ground. She started pummeling him with her quarterstaff.
"Ow! That hurts.
Oof." Ezri jabbed him in the belly with the end of her weapon.
"Don't mind this idiot," she said. "There's no custom or law like that."
"Really?
What if she was interested?" Chief Isses wheezed. Nemel winced as Chief Isses was swatted again.
"Really?" Ezri replied, giving the lizardman lord another thump. "You don't have to marry them if you don't want to."
"Then, no offense," Nemel said, "but I don't think it would work."
"It wouldn't?"
Elishnish suppressed her disappointment. She wanted to see what the children looked like.
Following a belated introduction between the two parties, Chief Isses limped out of the storeroom, leading them up to the second floor of the building. Ezri's quarterstaff tapped over the floor as she followed the chief with narrowed eyes. They stopped at a room with several lizardman priests. CSH, the forest green-head druid, came up to greet them.
"I see you've been up to some mischief again, Chief."
"Don't heal him," Ezri muttered darkly.
"Right.
No heals. Why does the headhunter have more clout than the tribe's chief?" Chief Isses complained. Ezri raised her staff threateningly. Anyway, Chief Ess said. These humans came by to see if you could teach these goblins druidic magic. CSH leaned forward to examine Fire and Gog.
They have the look of mystics, he said, but are you sure they're druids?
Fire appears to be something like a druid,
at least, Nemel said.
She has apothecary skills and can cast healing magic. The only other vocations that I can think of that do both are clerics, priests, and alchemists, but I don't think they appear in these goblins' tribal culture.
I don't see any flaws with that logic. What about Gog?
Well, Gog can cast summon spices, but he doesn't appear to have anything else. I see, CSH said. So he could be anything that goblin tribes might have. I'm willing to try teaching them, but there are a few things that need to be taken care of first.
What things? Nemel asked.
Some regulations laid down by Lady Zaradnik,
CSH answered.
First, vocational training comes after basic education. All students need to meet a certain standard of literacy and mathematical skills. So I need to send them to school? If it was Warden's Vale or any territory directly under Baroness Zaradnik, tuition is paid for by House Zaradnik. Since Dame Verilyn is here, I assume you're affiliated with her in some way.
Yes, that's right,
Nemel nodded. I'm her seneschal. The rest you see here are her subjects. Then you'll have to do it the same way that the Winter Scale tribe does. You need to register them as students and include the cost of education in the territorial budget. If you have your own teachers, that works too so long as you can match the territory's educational standards. Is it expensive to send students to Warden's Vale? Not relative to the average income here. The teachers there are trained to teach humans, however. Our village opted to have our own teachers who are accustomed to working with lizardman children. All races have their differences, so it may be better for someone in Dame Verilyn's territory to learn how to teach goblins. Especially since there are always more goblins. Nemel nodded thoughtfully. Her gaze went to Fendros, who whimpered in response. They use Riastai's script here, right? Nemel asked. That's right, CSH nodded. Then it's probably best to do as you've suggested. We'll be back when we get that done. Goblins were notoriously simple-minded, so Elishnish wondered how long that would take.